The wind changed first. That morning, before the sky split open and the cattle turned their flanks to the horizon, before the snow rose like a curtain between the ranch and the rest of the world, it was the wind that told Ruth something was coming. She felt it in her ribs more than she heard it. The way it moved through the dry grass outside the barn had a different pitch, lower, coarser. She couldn't hear the wind, not in the way the others could. But she'd grown up watching its shape in the land, in dust lines and leaf patterns, and she knew its moods like other girls knew hymns. She was 23, broad in the shoulders from the work, not the bloodline, deaf since fever took her hearing at 8. People still called her the girl, though she could ride, shoot, and gut an elk faster than most men in Wapiti County. Words, once lost, had never fully returned to her mouth. She learned to keep them inside. Her voice, when it came, was flat and thick as wet ash, so she mostly let it go unsaid. Her father was long dead, her mother, too. The ranch belonged to the Granger brothers now. They kept her on as a hand, more out of guilt than need. That morning she was out mending the west fence when the wind shifted. She paused, one hand on a splintered post, and looked up at the sky. A thin gray sheet stretched across the sun. Her horse, Magpie, stirred. A shiver moved through its haunches. Ruth narrowed her eyes, watching the way the light began to drain from the hills. They told her to finish the fence line, told her it needed to be done before the storm broke, but it was too late now. She felt it in the air, saw it in the sudden silence that rolled across the prairie like a sheet being pulled taut. She swung into the saddle and turned Magpie back toward the ranch. By the time she saw the first white flake catch in the horse's mane, she knew she wasn't going to make it. The wind picked up so quick it seemed to slap the world sideways. Visibility dropped to the length of her arm. Snow drove in hard, not flakes anymore but grains, sharp as bone splinters. Ruth tried to steer Magpie by memory, but the cold bit fast. Her hands were raw in minutes. She lost her sense of direction when the wind shifted again, and then Magpie bucked at something unseen and bolted. The reins slipped from her fingers. She hit the ground hard, her head cracking against the frozen dirt. She came to with blood in her mouth and snow on her eyelashes. The horse was gone. Her gloves, too. Her right boot was twisted wrong at the ankle. She tried to stand. Pain flared white-hot behind her knee, and she dropped to her elbows, gasping though no sound came. She was deaf to the world and now stranded in a storm that swallowed everything. For hours, or what felt like hours, she crawled. Snow caked in her sleeves, down her collar. She stopped feeling her feet. The world blurred. Her mind wandered to strange places. A fire once, long ago. Her mother's hands wringing out a cloth soaked in vinegar. Her father's belt, the way it snapped off his waist in silence like a rattlesnake in dry grass. When she passed out again, the snow had buried her up to her chest. He was not looking for her. He was headed toward the Granger place to settle a debt. His name was Elijah Cutter, known in 3 counties as a cattleman who got what he paid for and didn't flinch from taking what he didn't. He wasn't born rich, but he had the look now, dark wool coat, silver spurs, a Winchester repeater slung under his saddle horn. His horse was a black roan named Verdict, the kind of mount you trusted with your life but not your secrets. The storm had caught him on the flats, too. He tied a scarf over his mouth, pulled his hat down low, and rode with the kind of grim resolve that only a man used to frostbite and betrayal could wear. He saw her by accident, just a shape under the snow, a rise that didn't match the land. At first he thought it was a dead steer. Then he saw her hand. He dismounted fast, snow crunching under his boots, cleared the snow with both arms, half expecting to find a corpse. But when he touched her throat, her pulse was faint, her skin was waxy. She wasn't shivering anymore, and that was worse than screaming. He didn't ask who she was, he didn't weigh his options. He pulled her up over his shoulder and mounted back onto Verdict with a grunt. The ride back to his winter ranch was 7 miles through hard wind and sleet. He wrapped his coat around them both. Her body was stiff in places where cold had started to rot. He rode hard, not thinking, just moving, just saving the one thing that could still be saved. The ranch was a stone house tucked into the hills, built by his grandfather who'd fought in the war and lost his left hand to a bayonet. Elijah lit the stove, peeled off his gloves with his teeth and set her on the bearskin rug near the hearth. She didn't wake. Her lips were cracked. Frostbite bloomed like bruises across her cheeks. He stripped off her outer layers, wincing at the dead weight of her limbs. He wrapped her in wool and laid hot stones around her body. Rubbed her fingers until color began to stir. She gasped once, just a single breath. He leaned down close. "Don't talk," he said, not knowing she couldn't hear him. "You're alive, that's enough for now." She opened her eyes, unfocused, and stared straight through him. He sat back, watching her. The storm howled outside, but the fire caught strong. He knew enough about cold to know the worst part came after the thaw, when pain returned and memory with it. She would live, he'd seen death. This wasn't it, not yet. But what kind of woman gets left to die in a storm like that? He didn't ask out loud. He just poured a tin of coffee and waited. She woke to light. It didn't come soft. It stabbed through her eyelids, hot and mean, like the first sun after a long tunnel. Her whole body ached, throat raw, eyes dry. She tried to sit up, but something inside her ribs protested, so she lay still and took inventory. A roof above her, fire to her left, fur beneath her. Pain in her ankle, sharp and white, like a nail hammered too deep. Then came the silence. She reached up slowly to her ears as if expecting to find them gone. They were there, still useless. Her heart thudded like hooves in mud. The man entered then, tall, broad across the chest. His face was weather-bitten and watchful, with the kind of jaw that stayed clenched even in sleep. He held a tin bowl. His mouth moved, forming words she couldn't hear. When she didn't respond, his brows lowered in a subtle confusion. She made the sign for can't hear. He stared for a beat, then his mouth moved again, slower this time. He set the bowl beside her, lifted one hand and signed back, clumsy, stiff, "You hurt." She blinked. That a man like him knew even that much struck her strange. She nodded once. He pointed to her leg, then reached for it. She flinched. His hands paused midair. "Need to see," he signed. "Careful now." She let him. The splint was made of kindling and belt leather, bound tight to her calf. He unwrapped it with practiced fingers, and she felt the heat spread from her knee down into the swollen meat of her ankle. She gritted her teeth but made no sound. He watched her like a farrier watches a wild horse, respectful, cautious. He didn't speak again, just checked the bruising, adjusted the bindings, and left the room. The house was solid, built from quarried limestone, with beams of blackened cedar and thick-paned windows that watched the hills like a man watches enemies. It was quiet in the way of winter places, with every sound muffled by snow and distance. She began to piece things together in the days that followed. He lived alone, no wife, no children, no hired hands. He cooked for her, fed the fire, hauled water in steel buckets from the springhouse out back. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was slow, careful, as if he'd learned once how to speak to someone like her and half forgotten the skill. His signs were rough, but she understood enough. Rest, eat, pain, snow heavy today, coyotes near the barn. She learned his name by accident. A letter sat half open on the mantel one day while he was outside chopping wood. It bore the name Elijah Cutter in slanted ink. Below it, the words property dispute, owed payment, Granger. Granger. Her stomach turned. That name was a door she'd spent years bolting shut. The storm had hidden it from her, but now it clawed its way back. What had happened before the wind came? She had been working fence. The Granger brothers had ridden past, one drunk, one quiet. They had stopped, said nothing at first, then said something cruel, then said worse. She hadn't run, couldn't, not with the snow rising and no horse to outrun them. They left her there, maybe to die, maybe just to teach her what silence was really worth. She hadn't told Elijah, not yet. By the second week, she could hobble on a crutch he'd carved from pine. The blizzard had passed, but snow still clung to the valleys in drifts higher than the windowsills. The storm had torn the ranchlands apart, no roads open, no telegraphs working. just sky and cold and the dull ache of survival. She didn't speak much. He didn't ask her to. One morning, she caught him watching her hands as she signed silently to herself, counting supplies in the pantry. She paused. He pointed to his own chest. "Me want learn." She blinked. "Why?" He struggled, then signed, talking, "With you worth it." No one had ever said that to her. Not with words, not with signs. She nodded once, then began. Each day they worked a little. She taught him how to shape letters with his fingers, how to speak with motion instead of noise. He was slow but stubborn, and she respected that. He called her Ruth, though she'd never told him her name. She figured he'd found it somewhere in her coat or in a half-frozen tag stitched by her mother long ago. The strange thing was, she started to feel safe. And that scared her more than the storm ever had. One night, a month into the freeze, they sat by the hearth. Her ankle had begun to heal, though she still limped. He passed her a cup of cider. She stared into the fire, then signed, "I remember you." He looked at her, unmoving. She signed again, 5 years ago, cattle auction in Dry Bend. "I was with my father. You bid on a blue roan, didn't win. Fought the winner behind the stables." He laughed an actual sound, low and surprised. "That was you, you saw that. My father said you were trouble, that you had too much pride for your own good." He leaned back in the chair. "Your father was right." She sipped, then slowly, "He's dead now." A long silence passed between them. "Then storm wasn't the worst part," she signed. He nodded, waited. She looked down, fingers shaking. "They left me, Granger's men, the brothers, said I wasn't worth hauling back." He didn't react at first, didn't blink. Then his jaw tensed. "You sure?" he asked, in signs she had taught him. She nodded once. No tears, no plea, just the truth. He stood, moved to the stove, filled a kettle with water and set it over the flame. His hands moved slower now, focused, intent. "They owe me money," he signed, without looking back. "Now I owe them something too." Ruth didn't speak, just watched the kettle begin to hiss. The thaw would come, and when it did, so would reckoning. By March, the thaw had begun to creep in from the edges of the hills. It didn't come loud. Just the slow drip of icicles, the groan of shifting snowbanks, the first black sprigs of earth breaking free along the southern fence line. The world was waking up ugly, mud everywhere, frostbite in the root beds, roofs sagging from weeks of weight. But life, stubborn and soft-bellied, was crawling back into the seams. Ruth could walk by then, not well, not without the limp, but enough to reach the barn and back by herself. Elijah never offered help unless asked. He watched from a distance, ready but not hovering. She appreciated that. He gave her back control piece by piece, not because he pitied her, but because he understood what power was and what it meant to lose it. She had nightmares sometimes, not of the storm, but of the soundless way those Granger boys had laughed when they left her behind. No insult, no shout, just the weight of their stares, the flick of reins, snow kicking up around her legs like dirt over a grave. She'd wake up drenched, trembling, and find him sitting by the hearth, knife in hand, whittling something small and sharp. He never asked what she dreamed. She never told him. Instead, they prepared. Elijah had a weapons cabinet bolted behind the pantry wall. Rifles, pistols, blades, none of them polished, all of them used. She'd always known how to shoot. Her father had taught her to kill a rabbit at 30 paces with a .22, but Elijah taught her how to kill quiet. He taught her where to aim to drop a man without wasting a second shot, where to slice to silence a scream. What wood made the best grips? What metal could pass through bone? They practiced with gloves in the cold, breath turning to steam, heart steady. She didn't ask why he helped her. He didn't ask where it would end. They both knew. The first body was found in early April. A trapper stumbled across it near Bitter Horn Creek, half-eaten by coyotes, but the cause was clear. Bullet through the eye, clean and fast. Name was Lewis Granger, the drunk one, the one who had laughed the loudest. Elijah said nothing. Ruth didn't smile. But that night, as the fire cracked low and the wind rolled soft through the cracks, she stood at the window long after the oil lamp had gone out. One hand rested on the sill, steady, waiting. They rode out a week later. She wore dark wool scarfed tight against the wind, a knife tucked into her boot, a Colt strapped to her hip. Elijah carried no visible weapon, but Ruth had seen what lay in his saddlebag. They didn't talk much on the trail. The snow was gone, but the earth still held winter in its bones. Trees were bare, hills bleached. They traveled by back trails, avoiding ranch hands and townsfolk. Wapiti County hadn't changed, still mean, still ruled by men like the Grangers, who wore their cruelty like brands, passed down from fathers who'd stolen land and blood in equal measure. Ruth knew where they'd be. The Grangers ran cattle south in spring, kept their stock pens near Silver Ridge. She remembered the layout. Fences like ribs, bunkhouse to the east, smokehouse out back. They waited till dusk. Elijah watched the ridge with a field glass. Just the older one left, he signed. She nodded, her breath was steady, her palms didn't sweat. She went in alone. The yard was empty, dirt churned to mud. A lantern swung by the barn door, casting long shadows. She moved quiet, boots sinking deep. Inside, the bunkhouse stank of grease and piss. Clarence Granger sat at a wooden table, cutting jerky with a dull blade. Older now, jowls sagging, still built thick like a butcher's block. He looked up. His eyes didn't widen, didn't flinch, just stared. "You," he said. She didn't respond, just raised the pistol. He smirked. "Didn't know we left you alive. Suppose that's on us." She stepped closer. Her hands didn't shake. "You come to kill me then, that what this is?" She nodded. He spat to the side. "Should have died in that snow, would have been cleaner." She raised the pistol higher. "You think you're righteous?" he asked. "You're nothing, just a deaf stray. You think the law's gonna care when you're gone." She lowered the pistol, just a fraction. Then she drew the knife. He reached for something behind the chair under the table, but she was already there. The blade went in beneath the ribs, clean, fast. She watched his mouth twist around a final insult he didn't finish. His hands clawed at the table. Blood spilled down in thick ropes. She let him fall. When she stepped back into the night, Elijah was waiting with the horses. He didn't ask. She didn't tell. They didn't ride home right away. They took a long trail south, through foothills and scrub valleys, camped by dry creeks and long-fallen cottonwoods. Spring began to show in the green edging of leaves, in the way the birds came back without fear. Ruth said little, but something inside her had shifted, not lighter, not freer, just settled. "I'm not going back to the Granger Ranch," she signed one night, sitting cross-legged by the fire. Elijah nodded. "Didn't figure you would." She looked up. "Where then?" He poked the coals, thought a while. "Then, anywhere you want." She smiled just a little. "Even California," she signed. He laughed. "Even there." The stars burned low above them. Coyotes yipped in the distance, thin and high like cracked whistles. For the first time in her life, Ruth wasn't surviving. She was living. But she knew better than to believe the story was done. Because men like the Grangers don't die clean. And vengeance always leaves something behind. They crossed the state line under a veil of cloud. No grand gesture, no farewell to Wapiti County, just hoofbeats in thawed earth and the smell of wet cedar rising from the trees. Spring had broken open the hills, and with it came a quiet neither of them trusted. Ruth had expected something more after Clarence Granger's death, a chase, a wire sent east, riders cresting the ridge with rifles raised. But silence followed instead. Weeks passed. Nothing came. They stayed moving. Elijah had property near the Snake River, a way station he used for trading roots years ago before the money came in thick. He hadn't been back since the drought. The roof sagged, but the stonework held. He cleaned it out, hammered new shutters, fixed the door while Ruth worked the land. She split wood, boiled creek water, snared rabbits in the brush, and skinned them before dawn. Her limp softened into a rhythm. Out there, with no one to see her, she started to speak again. Not with her voice, she had long given up trying to shape vowels the world would understand, but with her hands, her posture, the way she moved through the cabin. There was power in silence. She'd known that, but now she understood something else. There was also power in being witnessed. He watched her without pity, without ownership, and in that she found something unfamiliar, not love, not yet, but something that shared a root with it. Still, there were things between them that hadn't been said. The first came on a Tuesday. A rusted wagon pulled up near the fence line. Two men, thin horses, bad boots. One carried a Remington on his back. The other had a scar that split his lip in half. Elijah watched them through the window, unmoving. "Trouble," Ruth signed. He nodded. Granger had cousins. South of the ridge might be them. "Do they know I'm alive?" "Maybe not, but someone asking." They buried the bodies behind the tool shed. Elijah had taken the Remington for himself. Ruth kept the other man's knife, bone-handled, well-worn, balanced. No words had been exchanged, no accusations, just suspicion, confirmation, then violence. She didn't flinch anymore. That part of her had burned out in the snow. Afterward, she asked Elijah a question she'd been holding since the day he pulled her from the storm. "Why did you stop for me?" He didn't answer right away. Sat back on the porch step, cleaning the dirt from under his nails. "When I was 15, he said aloud, voice flat, "my sister was caught in a flood out east of Sherman. Wagon flipped. She was deaf too. Folks left her. Thought she'd already drowned." He didn't look at her, just stared at the trees like they might shift if he watched hard enough. "I found her 3 days later, alive, barely. After that, I learned to speak her way." Ruth nodded, her throat tight. "She's still alive." "No, married wrong, got sick, but she taught me things before she went." He looked at Ruth now, and there was nothing soft in his face, only truth. "You reminded me of her, that's all." She believed him, but there was more to it, and they both knew it. He hadn't saved her because she was like someone he loved. He'd saved her because the world had tried to unmake her, and something in him couldn't stand to watch it succeed. That night they sat by the fire with no words, just the steady sound of wind against the stones and the slow, careful sharpening of Ruth's new knife. The next rider didn't come quiet. He wore a marshal's badge and carried an envelope sealed in red wax. Rode a gelding that had seen better feed and worse days. His name was Avery Polk. Said he was from Boone County. Claimed to be investigating the suspicious disappearance of the Granger brothers. Ruth sat in the doorway while Elijah spoke. She didn't need to hear the man to know his kind. The tilt of his jaw, the way he kept one hand near his belt buckle, authority like rot, deep-set, spreading. Elijah offered coffee, asked questions. Polk didn't drink, just stared too long at Ruth's hands, at the scar that coiled around her wrist like a birthmark from flame. "She can't talk," Elijah said. "Looks like she can," Polk answered. The two men held each other's gaze long enough to peel varnish. Polk left before sundown, didn't say goodbye, just rode off with his suspicions trailing behind him like smoke. Later, Elijah found her in the pasture. She was checking the snare lines, though they hadn't caught anything in days. "He'll be back," she signed. "I know. He won't be alone next time." Elijah looked at the hills. Then we don't wait. She didn't ask where they'd go. It didn't matter. She trusted her legs again, trusted her hands, her eyes, her will. And if the law came, it would come too late. Because Ruth wasn't just surviving anymore. She was planning. They left before dawn with only what they could carry. Saddlebags packed with dried meat, bullets, and coins. Elijah had built a false bottom in his pack where he kept the forged deed to a mining claim far west, under a new name, one that bore no trail. Ruth took only the rifle, the knife, and a folded cloth wrapped around a lock of her mother's hair, sun-bleached and brittle with age, but still hers. They headed northwest, across country that hadn't yet healed from winter. Rivers still ran high from melt-off. Mud choked the wheels of wagons they passed. Coyotes ran in daylight. There was talk of war in distant territories, of gold strikes and land disputes, but none of it touched them. Not yet. Each night they camped beneath trees with wide limbs, close to water but not too close, far from road or rail. Ruth took first watch. Elijah second. Neither slept through the other's shift, though they pretended to. Days blurred, places changed. But Polk's voice hung behind them like a shadow, calculated, too curious, clipped in the way of men used to the smell of blood. They reached a town called Greystone before the end of May. One of those places built fast, half-finished, full of tired men and women too poor to leave. Storefronts had no names. The church was burned out, roofless. But the blacksmith's forge worked hot, and there was a telegraph line snaking from the sheriff's office to God knew where. They found shelter in a shuttered sawmill just outside town. No signs, no questions. The owner had gone under after a lawsuit left him broke. Elijah broke the lock, patched a hole in the roof, and they moved in like ghosts. For the first time in weeks, they didn't run. Then one night, Ruth heard the boots. She didn't hear the sound, her world stayed quiet, but she felt it through the floorboards. The tremor of weight, 2, maybe 3 sets, not drunk, not rushing, measured, intent. She woke Elijah with a touch. He didn't speak, just moved. They'd rehearsed this, twice over. Out the back door, down the embankment. Cut north toward the gully, he led, she followed, then stopped. Elijah turned, saw her not behind him. She was going back. She signed, quick, they'll chase us forever, you know that. He shook his head, we go together, we end this together. Her hand hovered in the air, fingers stiff. Then, I need to be the one. His jaw clenched. She didn't wait for permission. She circled wide, came in from the eastern slope. The mill glowed faint from the lamplight inside. 3 horses tied out front. One was Polk's. She remembered the saddle stitching. She entered through the crawl space, rifle strapped across her back, blade in hand, no sound, no mercy. They didn't see her at first, Polk and 2 deputies. Sitting by the fire they'd lit inside, talking quiet, laughing even. The first went down fast, a gurgle, artery gone. He fell with his cup still in his hand. Polk stood, already reaching. She raised the rifle and put one in the deputy's throat. Polk froze, eyes on her, mouth twitching. I knew it, he said low. I knew you weren't just some crippled girl. She stepped closer. You shoot me, he said. They'll send more. Law doesn't stop. She signed slowly, clearly. Good, let them come. I'll teach them the same lesson. Polk blinked. What the hell does that mean? She shot him before he finished the sentence. They buried the bodies under sawdust, poured oil on the floor, and burned the mill down to stone and ash. Elijah didn't ask what happened inside. He didn't need to. She came out covered in soot and blood and something deeper, a stillness that came only when a long open wound finally scabbed over. They rode that night, took no road. By morning they were 10 miles west, past the edge of the map most men trusted. They didn't speak. But something had shifted. Ruth was no longer the girl left to die in a storm. She was the storm now. And there was one more part still to come. They rode west until the land stopped whispering the past. No fences, no rusted gates, no names carved into headstones of boys who never came home. Just open country, dry grass humming in the wind, mountains jagged like broken promises on the horizon. Ruth didn't ask where they were headed. She already knew. Not a town, not a place, a state of being, unchained. In the highlands near Dead Mule Pass, they built again. Not a house, not yet, but a life. Tents first, then beams, then stone. Elijah dug the ground flat with a pickaxe and a plan. Ruth drew lines in the dirt with a stick, shaping rooms, thresholds, shadows. They lived not as fugitives, but as people who had earned their right to peace through fire and blood. Summer came hot, thick with bugs and sap and sweat. She planted tobacco, he hunted elk. The days moved in long stretches of work, no visitors, no lawmen. The world turned quiet in the best way. One morning she woke before the sun. The air was strange, heavy, warm, full of a tension she couldn't name. She stepped outside and saw the hawk first, circling above the ridge. Wide arcs, slow and low, below it 3 riders, far off, moving careful. She didn't panic, just went inside and picked up the rifle. Elijah met her at the door. "I saw them," he said. She nodded. "They won't stop." "No," she signed, "they won't." He looked down at her hands, at the fingers that had killed men, that had once trembled on a ranch floor covered in snow. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Her hands moved slow, deliberate. "Bury them like the rest, then finish the roof." It was not a battle, it was a reckoning. They laid the traps the night before, thin wires between brush, loose shale over ledges, narrow sight lines traced with powder. Elijah stood high with the repeater. Ruth took the draw below, her knife in one boot, 2 shots in her coat pocket, one for each if they came close, one for herself if they came too close. When the riders appeared at dawn, they were cocky. One waved a white cloth, the others held rifles sideways. They thought this was parley. They thought they still lived in a world where mercy could be bartered. They did not understand what it cost to rise from a grave dug by men like them. The first fell before his boot touched the ground. Elijah's shot took him through the mouth. The others dismounted fast, scattered, returned fire. Ruth waited, then moved. She didn't think about the storm anymore, or the barn, or the soft hush of her father's voice before he died, saying her name like it might break something open. She thought only of the present, of wind, of weight, of the soundless click her boots made as they crossed the shale. She slit the throat of the man with the white cloth, held him as he bled, eyes wide and lips trying to shape words she couldn't hear. The last man ran. Elijah didn't chase him. Ruth did. She found him scrambling down a draw, blood in his teeth, spurs tangled in roots. She didn't shoot, didn't scream, just moved in and let her silence be the last thing he knew. They buried the bodies in a dry ravine and let the hawks have what the earth didn't want. Then they finished the roof. Autumn came red, with wind that shook the trees but didn't shake them. The house stood firm. Smoke curled from the chimney. The field behind it bore rows of squash and beans. The scars on Ruth's arms healed into silver ropes. Her limp softened to nothing. She didn't keep the rifle by the bed anymore. But the knife stayed under the pillow. One night Elijah brought a cedar box to the fire. Inside was a brass ring, simple, not polished, heavy. He signed, "It doesn't mean ownership, just that I see you, all of you, and I don't look away." She didn't answer for a long time, just watched the flames shift in the hearth, the way they curled up and didn't break. Then she signed, "I see you too." Years passed. People came and went through the hills, traders, drifters. No one asked too many questions. The house stood, the fields grew, and Ruth Cutter, once a deaf girl left to die in a storm, lived. She lived long. She lived quiet. She lived free. And the land remembered her not as a victim, but as a force. The one the storm could not claim. The one who carried her silence like a weapon. The one who endured.